I almost died. But the most painful part wasn't the wound inside my body. It was the message my own family sent me while I was lying in an ambulance. They told me to stop overreacting and figure it out myself because they were busy going to a concert. And in that exact moment, I realized that for 34 years, I had never truly had a real family. My name is Maris. I am 34 years old, a cardiology resident, and a single mother of 3-year-old twins. I have always been strong on my own. I have always handled everything myself. But I never imagined that the one moment I needed my family the most, I would be the moment they chose to walk away from me. And if you are listening right now, I would love to know where you are and what time it is because I want to know who this story is reaching. And if you have ever, I felt abandoned by your own family. Stay with me because what comes next might feel very familiar. I grew up in a home where love always had conditions. My older sister Claire was always the favorite. Beautiful, confident, admired by everyone, and especially by our parents, while I was simply the practical one, the one who could take care of herself. I heard that sentence my entire childhood when Claire said she wanted to become a fashion designer. My mother cried tears of pride, and my father called her talented. But when I said I wanted to become a doctor, my father just nodded and said that is stable, and that was it. So I told myself it did not matter. I just needed to work harder, be better, and maybe one day they would finally see me. So I buried myself in studying as if my entire life depended on it. And maybe it really did. 8 years ago, after I graduated, my father called me saying they were struggling and needed help just temporarily. I did not hesitate. I transferred $2,400 that same night, and that was the beginning of everything they said. It was just one time, but then it became every month. The mortgage, the insurance, the repairs, even money for Claire's fashion projects all became my Claire's responsibility. And I never said no, even when I was pregnant alone, abandoned, and terrified in a hospital bed. I called them not for money, just for someone to be there. But they told me Claire needed them more, and they never came yet the money. I sent never stopped. I thought that was love. I thought that was family. Until the day everything shattered. The accident happened after a 16-hour shift. I was exhausted, but all I wanted was to go home and hold my children when suddenly, a truck ran a red light and crashed into me. There was no warning, just impact and darkness. When I woke up, I was in an ambulance, bleeding in unbearable pain. The doctor said I might have internal bleeding and needed emergency surgery, and in that moment, the only thing I could think about was my children. I called my father. I begged, I told him I might die. But what I received was a message saying, "Stop bothering us. We have concert tickets tonight." Followed by a laughing emoji, and right then something inside me broke. Completely. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply went silent. I called an emergency nanny service, paid triple, and handled everything myself. And in that moment, I made a decision. A cold, clear decision. I would stop everything. And if you have ever reached that point where you realize you have nothing left to give, type I understand because I want to know. You are here with me. 5 days after surgery, I lay in a hospital bed with no calls, no messages, no visits from my family, only strangers taking care, 2 of me, and photos of my children sent by a hired service. I opened my laptop and looked at every transfer I had sent over 8 years, more than $360,000. I stared at the number for a long time, then I canceled every payment, blocked every number. No tears, no hesitation, just one feeling: relief. But I did not know that this was only the beginning. 2 weeks later, when I finally returned home, still in pain, still recovering, there was a knock on my door, and when I looked through the peephole, my heart nearly stopped because standing there was the one person I never expected to see, the only person who could change everything: my grandfather. I stood there for a second, staring through the peephole, unable to move, because the man standing outside my door was the last person I ever expected to show up in my life again. My grandfather, the only person in this family who never raised his voice, but whose presence alone could silence an entire place. Room, and for some reason, my hands started shaking. As I slowly opened the door, he did not say a word. At first he just looked at me, really looked at me, like he was searching for something in my face, and then, without warning, he pulled me into a tight hug and whispered, "I know everything." And in that moment, something inside my chest that I had been holding in for years almost broke completely. I stepped back, trying to stay composed, but my voice was not as steady as I wanted it to be. "How did you find out?" I asked. And he simply replied, "Your aunt called me the night it happened. And when she told me what your parents said to you, I knew I had waited too long to step in." He walked into my house slowly, looking around, as if he was piecing together the life I had been living, without anyone noticing the toys on the floor, the dishes in the sink, the quiet exhaustion that still lingered in the air from everything I had been carrying alone for years. He sat down at the table while my twins cautiously approached him, curious but not afraid, and within minutes he was smiling at them, asking their names, listening to them like they were the most important people in the world. And I realized something I had. I've never seen my own parents do that with this much patience, this much presence, and it hit me harder than I expected after a few minutes. He turned back to me, and his expression changed, completely serious. Calm and firm. "Do you still have records of the money you sent them?" he asked, and I nodded slowly. "Every transfer, every payment," I said, and he gave a small approving nod. "Good. Then I want you to organize everything, every dollar, every date, because next week at my birthday dinner, the whole family will be there, and the truth needs to be heard." I felt my stomach tighten instantly, not because I did not want the truth to come out, but because I knew what it would mean. It would not just expose what they had done, it would break the image the family had carefully built for years, and I was not sure I was ready for that. "What if they hate me?" I asked quietly, and he looked at me for a long moment, before saying, "The people who deserve you will not, and the ones who do never truly did." And for the first time in long time, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel: hope, but it was mixed with fear, because deep down, I knew this was not going to be a quiet conversation, this was going to be a confrontation. And if you have ever stood on the edge of telling a truth that could change everything, you know exactly how that feels. That mixture of relief and terror at the same time. And if you are still here listening to me right now, I want you to tell me, would you have the courage to speak, or would you stay silent? Because the next part of my story is where everything started to unravel completely. The night of my grandfather's birthday arrived faster than I was ready for, and as I sat in the car outside his house with my hands resting on the steering wheel, I realized something my entire life had been leading to this moment: not the accident, not the money, not even the betrayal, but this exact a point where I would have to decide whether I would stay silent like I always had, or finally tell the truth. I glanced in the rearview mirror at Oliver and Sophie sitting in their seats behind me, talking softly, unaware that the next few hours could change everything about the family they were born into, and I took a slow breath before stepping out of the car, holding my bag tightly because inside it was the folder: 8 years of numbers. 8 years of silence. 8 years of being the one who gave everything without ever asking for anything in return. The house was already full of people, laughter, music, glasses, clinking. Everything looked perfect on the surface, like every family gathering I had ever attended. But this time I could feel it beneath the surface. Something waiting, something ready to break. And the moment I walked through the door, the room shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but just enough for me to notice the way conversations paused, the way eyes followed me, the way whispers started forming quietly in corners. I saw my parents almost immediately standing near the fireplace, looking exactly the same as they always had, confident, composed, untouchable. And for a brief second I wondered if I should turn around, walk out, and pretend none of this was happening. But then I remembered the ambulance, the pain, the message, and the choice had already been made. Claire approached me first. Her smile polished her voice, light as if nothing had ever happened. "Oh, Maris, you came," she said, leaning in, like we were sisters who shared everything. I held her gaze and replied, I almost didn't. Her smile flickered for a moment. Before she recovered quickly, "You look good," she said, glancing at me like she was measuring something. I almost died. I answered calmly, and for a split second, the mask slipped from her face before she turned away, excusing herself into the crowd, like she always did when things became uncomfortable, and that was when I knew. Nothing had changed for her. Not really, and maybe it never. About 20 minutes later, I heard her voice again, but this time it was louder, deliberate enough for others to hear. "I'm really worried about Maris," she said to a group of relatives nearby. Accident affected her more than she admits. She's been saying strange things lately. I felt my body go still, as every word landed exactly where she wanted it to land, creating doubt before I even had a chance to speak. My mother joined in. Her voice, soft, trembling, practiced. "We've tried to help her," she said. "But she cut us off completely. We don't understand what happened to her," and just like that, the story was being rewritten right in front of me. I could feel people watching me, not with judgment yet, but with uncertainty. And that uncertainty was dangerous because it meant they were deciding who to believe. And if you have ever been in a room where your story is being told by someone else, you know how powerless that feels. But I said nothing. I simply stood there holding my children, steadying my breath, because I knew something. They didn't know I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here to defend myself. I was here for the truth, and the truth was coming, whether they were ready or not. And if you are listening right now, I want you to think about this moment carefully. What would you do if your own family tried to turn your pain into a lie? Would you speak immediately, or would you wait for the right moment? Because what happened next was something none of us could take back. The room slowly fell silent, not because anyone asked it to, but because something in the air shifted, the kind of shift that happens right before a storm breaks. And then I saw him, my grandfather, standing near the center of the room, setting his glass down with a calmness that felt almost unsettling. He did not raise his voice, he did not rush, but somehow, every single conversation stopped, every eye turned toward him, and in that moment, the party no longer felt like a celebration, it felt like a courtroom. "Before we continue with the evening," he said evenly, "I would like to say a few words." His tone was controlled, steady, the kind of voice that did not need to demand attention because it naturally commanded it. My father immediately stepped forward, forcing a polite smile. "Dad, maybe this isn't the right time," he said quickly, but my grandfather did not even look at him. "This is exactly the right time," he replied calmly, "because family deserves the truth." And then he turned his gaze directly toward my father, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "Richard," he said, "let me ask you something simple. Who has been paying your mortgage for the past 8 years?" The question landed like a shockwave across the room. Conversations that had just started to recover, froze again. My father blinked, clearly caught off guard. "We pay our own mortgage," he answered too quickly, too confidently. And for the first time, I saw something crack in his composure. My grandfather reached into his jacket and pulled out the folder. My folder, the one I had handed him days earlier, and held it up slightly because according to these records, he continued calmly, "Someone else has been paying $2,400 every month for 96 months straight." A ripple, kind of whispers spread across the room. People leaned closer, eyes shifting between my father and the folder. "That's not what it looks like," my mother said quickly, her voice tight. But my grandfather did not pause. He opened the folder slowly, deliberately turning the pages, as if he were presenting evidence in court. "Mortgage payments," he said, clearly. $230,000 insurance premiums, $76,000, emergency expenses, and additional support over $40,000. And then he closed the folder and looked around the room. "The total amount is approximately $360,000. And suddenly the room was no longer quiet. It was heavy, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. My father's face had gone pale. My mother looked like she might collapse, and Claire stood frozen, her confidence completely gone. And then my grandfather spoke again, but this time his voice softened just slightly. "I am not here to accuse," he said. "I am simply presenting facts, and facts speak for themselves. He paused, letting Hubad, in the weight of his words, settle before continuing. Now I have another question. He looked directly at my parents during those 8 years. How many times did you thank her? No answer. How many times did you thank her? Show up when she needed you. Silence again. How many times did you choose her? The question hung in the air unanswered because everyone in that room already knew the truth, and then without raising his voice, my grandfather delivered the final blow. 2 months ago Maris was in a serious accident, he said. Slowly, she was bleeding internally and needed emergency surgery, and from the ambulance, she called her parents asking for help with her children. He took out his phone and looked down at the screen. Before reading the message aloud, "You've always been a burden, and figure it out yourself. We have plans tonight." And the moment those words echoed through the room, everything shattered. Gasps filled the air. Someone whispered, "That can't be real." But no one could deny it, because the truth has a way of making itself undeniable. My mother began to cry, not the controlled tears from earlier, but something raw and panicked. My father tried to speak, but no words came out, and Claire looked around desperately, as if the Plera, searching for someone, anyone to support her version of the story. But no one moved. People stepped back quietly, almost instinctively creating space between themselves and the lie that had just been exposed. And if you are still listening, right now I want you to feel this moment, because this is what truth looks like when it finally stands in the open. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is simply undeniable, and once it is seen, it can never be unseen. For a few seconds, no one moved, no one spoke. The truth had already been laid out in front of everyone, but something inside me told me this was not the end of it. This was only the beginning, and before I even realized it, I stepped forward. Slowly, my hands no longer shaking, my heart strangely calm, as if, after years of carrying everything alone, I had finally put the weight down. "I didn't come here for revenge," I said, my voice steady enough to surprise even myself. And every eye in the room turned toward me again, not with doubt this time, but with something different, something closer to understanding. "I came here because I was invited," I continued, "and because for most of my life, I believed in a version of this family that wasn't real. I paused for a moment, looking directly at my parents. For years, I thought I was the strong one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need anything, and maybe that's what you needed me to be." I gave a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "I believed every explanation you gave me. I believed that Claire needed more support. I believed that I could handle things on my own. And I tried. I tried to be exactly who you expected me to be." I swallowed slowly as the memory of everything I had carried pressed against my chest. But the night I was lying in that ambulance, bleeding and terrified, I finally understood something. I looked at them without anger, without shouting, or just quiet clarity. "I was never strong to you. I was convenient." A ripple moved through the room. "I wasn't reliable," I continued. "I was exploitable, and no matter how much I gave, it was never going to be enough to make you see me differently." My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother's sobs grew louder. But, for the first time, I did not feel the urge to comfort her. "I don't hate you," I said softly, and the words seemed to catch everyone off guard. "But I can't keep pretending that this is okay." I took a slow breath, grounding myself. "I can't keep buying love that should have been given freely," and for a moment, the entire room held its breath, because the truth does that: it makes people stop. It forces them to feel what they have been avoiding. My father finally found his voice. "So what now?" he asked, his tone sharp-edged, with something between anger and humiliation. "You've embarrassed us in front of everyone." I shook my head slowly. "I didn't embarrass you," I said quietly. "I told the truth, and there's a difference." Claire stepped forward suddenly, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Families help each other. You're acting like we did something wrong." I turned to face her calmly. "Families do help each other," I agreed. Then I asked one simple question. "Where were you when I needed you?" The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had been said before. "I'm not sending money anymore," I continued, turning back to my parents, Not because I can't, but because I won't. Not like this. Not when it has only ever gone one way. I shifted Sophie slightly in my arms, feeling her small hand grip my shoulder, as if she understood more than anyone realized. I'm not cutting you off forever, I added, because despite everything, a part of me still wanted to believe something could change. But I need space. Real space. Not a few weeks of pretending before everything goes back to the way it was. I looked at them one last time. If one day you can truly understand what you've done, maybe we can rebuild something. But until then, I'm choosing myself. And in that moment, I knew there was no is going back, not to the version of me that kept giving, not to the silence that kept everything hidden. And if you have ever had to choose yourself over people you thought you could never walk away from, I want you to think about this carefully. Because that choice, while painful, might be the most important one you ever make. For a few long seconds after I finished speaking, no one moved. No one even seemed to breathe, because the truth once spoken has a way of settling over people, slowly pressing into every corner of the room, and forcing everyone to face what and they would rather ignore. And then, almost quietly, it began, not with shouting, not with drama, but with distance. One relative stepped back, then another, and then another, as if an invisible line had been drawn, separating what was real from what had been a lie for years. My father stood frozen in place, his mouth slightly open as if he was still trying to find words that no longer existed. My mother was crying uncontrollably. Now, not the kind of tears meant to gain sympathy, but something deeper, something closer to panic, because for the first time, there was no one rushing to comfort her, no one stepping forward to defend her version of the story. Claire looked around the room, her eyes searching for support, for validation, for someone to agree with her, but the room had an end of Zen's story already shifted, and she could feel it just like I could. People were not looking at her the same way anymore. They were not looking at any of them the same way anymore. An uncle near the back finally spoke, his voice low but heavy. Jesus. Richard, he said slowly, all this time you were living off your own daughter and calling her a burden. The words landed harder than anything I could have said myself, because they were not coming from me. They were coming from someone who had just witnessed the truth unfold in real time. My father tried to respond, but his voice broke halfway through. We never meant it like that, he said weakly, but even he didn't sound convinced. My grandfather remained standing calm, composed, watching everything, without needing to add another word, because his job was done. The truth I had already spoken, and it was louder than any argument ever could be. I stood there holding my children, feeling something unfamiliar and settle inside me. Not anger, not sadness, but something quieter, something steadier. Freedom. It didn't come with relief the way I expected. It came with clarity, the kind that changes how you see everything and everyone around you. And if you have ever reached a point where you finally stop carrying what was never yours to carry, you know that feeling. It is not dramatic, it is not loud. It is simply a quiet release, as if something heavy has finally been set down after years of holding it alone. My mother took a step toward me, her hands trembling. Maris, please, she said, her voice breaking. We can fix this. We can talk. I looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, and for the first time, I did not feel responsible for her emotions. I'm not fixing this tonight, I replied gently, and that sentence alone seemed to hit her harder than anything else, because it meant control was gone. The version of me that always gave in, that always made things easier for them, was gone, and there was nothing they could do to bring her back. My father turned away, unable to meet anyone's eyes anymore, and one by one, people stopped speaking to them, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. When the truth becomes that clear, words lose their purpose within minutes. The room that had once felt full of noise and celebration had transformed completely. The music had stopped, the laughter was gone, and what remained was something much more real, something much more honest. And as I turned toward the door, holding Oliver and Sophie close, I knew this moment would follow all of us, long after this night ended. Because some truths once revealed do not disappear. They reshape everything. That night did not end with shouting or dramatic confrontations. It ended with something much quieter, and something far more permanent. Silence. My parents left early. No one stopped them. No one followed them, and no one said goodbye. The front door closed behind them. And it felt like a chapter had ended, not just for me, but for everyone who had witnessed what happened inside that house. In the days that followed, the ripple effects spread faster than I expected. Messages began arriving from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Some of them apologizing, some of them simply asking if I was okay. But what struck me the most was how quickly the narrative changed. The same people who once believed my parents without question were now questioning everything they thought they knew. The family group chat, where I had once been called a burden, went completely silent and then disappeared entirely, as if it had never existed. But the real shift was not in the messages, it was in the absence of invitations, gatherings I used to attend. Every holiday, every birthday, every weekend, dinner. My parents were no longer part of those conversations. No one made a formal decision, no one announced it, it just happened quietly and naturally, as if the truth. I had rearranged everything without needing permission. 3 weeks later, I heard from my aunt that my parents had listed their house for sale. At first I didn't react, I simply listened as she explained that without the monthly support, they could no longer keep up with the mortgage payments. The house that had stood as a symbol of stability for so many years was now becoming something else. A consequence. And for a moment, I waited for guilt to come. I waited for regret, for that familiar feeling that had actioned something else. Always pulled me back into their lives, but it didn't come. What I felt instead was something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Distance. Not cold, not cruel, just distance. The kind that allows you to see things clearly. For the first time I looked at my children playing in the living room that evening, and realized something: everything I had once given away, I could now give to them. Their future, their security, their stability, would no longer depend on sacrifice. It would be built on choice. And that realization changed something inside me completely. About 2 months later, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pause, and when I picked up the voice on the other end, and surprised me, it was Claire, but I didn't sound like herself. Her confidence was gone, her tone softer, almost uncertain. "I know I don't deserve your time," she said quietly, but I needed to say something, and for the first time, I heard something real in her voice. Not performance, not control, but honesty. "I'm sorry," she said, and the words hung. They're fragile, like they could break at any moment. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I didn't hear her, but because I was trying to understand what those words meant coming from someone who had. "I never needed to say them before. I didn't know about the money," she continued. "Not all of it, at least I knew they struggled sometimes. But I thought they handled it. I never asked." And then she paused, because I didn't want to know the say. Honesty in that moment felt heavier than any excuse could have been. I liked being the one they chose," she admitted. "I liked being the easy one, the one who never had to fight for attention." And for the first time, I understood something: she had been part of the system. But she had also been shaped by it, just like I had, in a different way. "I'm not asking you for anything," she added quickly. "Not forgiveness, not money. I just needed you to know that I see it now. All of it." I took a slow breath and replied, "Then, start there, stand on your own, be better." The call ended quietly, but it left something behind. Not resolution, not closure, but possibility. And sometimes that is enough to begin again. A year has passed since that night, and if you had told me back then that losing my family would feel like finding my life again, I wouldn't have believed you. But standing here now, watching my children laugh in a small apartment that we built together piece by piece, I finally understand something. I spent most of my life believing that love was something you had to earn, that if you gave enough, and sacrificed enough, and asked for nothing in return, eventually the people who were supposed to love you would see your worth. But the truth is, love was never meant to be a transaction. It was never meant to be something you had to prove through exhaustion and silence. Real love shows up when you need it most, not when it's convenient, not when it benefits someone else. But when it matters, and I didn't lose everything that night, I lost the illusion of a family that only existed as long as I kept giving. Without question, what I gained was something much more real: the ability to choose where my energy goes. The freedom to build a life where my children will never have to question their worth, and the strength to finally understand that boundaries are not betrayal, they are protection. My parents and I still don't speak, not because I hate them, but because I finally learned that distance is sometimes the only way to heal. And Claire, she is trying in her own way. Not perfect, not complete, but trying. And maybe that's enough for now. Maybe healing doesn't always come as a dramatic reunion. Maybe sometimes it comes quietly in the form of change, growth, and accountability. And if you are listening to this right now, I want you to ask yourself one question. Are you holding on to something that is slowly breaking you because you are afraid to let it go? Because sometimes the hardest decision you will ever make is the one that finally sets you free. If this story made you feel something even for a moment, I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from, and what would you have done in my place? Your voice matters more than you think. And your story might help someone else find their own strength. And if you believe that family should be built on love, respect, and truth, not obligation, then stay with this channel because there are many more stories waiting to be told. Stories that might just help someone, somewhere, choose themselves for the first time. There are things no one tells you about choosing yourself for the first time, because the moment you finally walk away from what has been hurting you for years, you expect to feel instant relief. You expect peace to rush in like a wave, washing everything clean, but that is not how it happens at least. Not for me. The first few weeks after everything settled were strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. Like the kind of silence that comes after a storm when the damage is still there, but the noises gone. I would wake up in the middle of the night, sometimes my body still remembering what it felt like to always be on edge, always waiting for the next call, the next request, the next moment, where I would have to give more than I had, and I took time to understand that no one was going to ask anymore. No one was going to call me in the middle of the night with another emergency that somehow always became my responsibility. And in that silence, I started to notice things about myself that I had ignored for years. I noticed how tired I was, not physically, but emotionally. The kind of tired that builds slowly over time when you keep showing up for people who never show up for you. I noticed how often I had minimized my own pain, telling in myself it was not that bad when other people had it worse, that I was strong enough to handle it. And maybe I was, but being strong should not mean being alone all the time. And one night, while I was sitting at the kitchen table after putting Oliver and Sophie to bed, I opened my laptop again, not to look at old payments, not to revisit the past, but to do something I had never done before. I started planning my life without them, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. I created a new life, a budget one, that did not include supporting two adults who had never supported me, one that focused entirely on what my children needed and what I needed to finally feel stable. And for the first time, the numbers made sense, not because I had more money, but because I finally had control. And that control changed everything slowly. I began to build routines, small ones at first, like taking the kids to the park every Sunday morning, cooking dinner without rushing, checking in with myself at the end of the crudies day, asking a simple question, am I okay? And sometimes the answer was yes. Sometimes it was no. But for the first time, I allowed myself to answer honestly without guilt, without pressure to pretend everything was fine, and that honesty became the foundation for everything that came next. Months passed, and life did not suddenly become perfect. There were still hard days, moments where memories would come back unexpectedly, moments where I would question if I had done the right thing, moments where guilt would try to creep in quietly, reminding me of everything I had been taught about family, about obligation, about sacrifice. But each time I felt that, I reminded myself of one simple truth: love should not hurt like that. Love should not make you feel invisible. And slowly those moments became less frequent, not because the past disappeared, but because it no longer controlled me, and then something unexpected happened. My relationship with my children began to change not because I loved them more, but because I was finally present in a way I had never been. Before, I was not distracted by stress, not overwhelmed by responsibilities that were never mine to begin with. I was there fully, and I saw things I had missed before, the way Oliver concentrated when he was building something, the way Sophie laughed at the smallest things, the way they both looked at me as if I was their entire world. And that realization hit me harder than anything else had, because for so long I had been trying to earn love from people who could not give it, while two small people had. I'd been giving it to me freely every single day, and I had almost missed it. And if you are listening right now, I want you to pause for a moment and think about where your energy is going. Who are you giving your time, your attention, your love to? And are they giving it back? Or are you slowly losing yourself trying to be enough for people who will never see you? And I am not saying walking away is easy. It is not. I am not saying it will solve everything. It won't. But what it will do is give you the chance to see your life clearly for the first time, without the noise, without the pressure, without the constant need to prove your worth. And that clarity is something no one can take from you once you have it. About 6 months after everything happened, I received another message, this time, not from Claire, not from my parents, but from someone I did not expect, my father. The message was short, simple, and for the first time in my life, it sounded real. I am sorry. It read, not the kind of apology that tries to explain, not the kind that shifts blame. Just those 3 words. I stared at the message for a long time, longer than I want to admit, because part of me had been waiting for it, not consciously, not actively, but somewhere, deep down. I had hoped that one day he would see what he had done. And in that moment I realized something important. The forgiveness is not about the other person. It is about you. It is about deciding whether holding on to the pain is serving you or keeping you stuck. And I did not reply that night. Not because I was angry, but because I needed time to understand what I wanted. Not what they needed, not what was expected of me, but what was right for me. And that was a question I had never asked myself before. And maybe that was the biggest change of all. Learning to ask, what do I need, instead of, what do they expect from me? Because for most of my life, those 2 things had been the same, and breaking that pattern was not easy. But it was necessary, and if there is one thing I have learned through all of this, it is that you cannot build a healthy life on unhealthy foundations. No matter how much you try, no matter how much you give, eventually something will break, and when it does, you will to be forced to choose, rebuild the same structure, or create something new. And choosing something new is terrifying, because it means stepping into the unknown without guarantees, without certainty, but it also means giving yourself the chance to create a life that actually belongs to you, and that is something worth fighting for. There is a strange kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who were never really listening in the first place, and I didn't realize how much of my life had been spent trying to be understood by people who had already decided who I was long before I ever had the person's chance to show them otherwise. For years I had been trying to prove something to my parents, that I could be enough, that I could be worthy of the same attention, the same love, the same pride they gave so easily to someone else. But the truth is, when people are committed to a version of you that benefits them, no amount of proof will ever change their perspective. And that realization was painful, not because it was new, but because I had ignored it for so long, pretending that if I just gave a little more, tried a little harder, things would eventually shift, but they never did. And walking away forced me to see that clearly for the first time, without excuses, without justifications, just the truth. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. No matter how much you wish you could. Life after that realization did not become easier overnight, but it became more honest. And there is something powerful about honesty, even when it was busy, is uncomfortable, even when it forces you to sit with feelings you have spent years avoiding. I started noticing how often I would second guess myself in small decisions: what to cook, what to say, how to respond to messages, as if somewhere deep inside I was still waiting for someone else's approval, and breaking that habit took time. It took conscious effort to remind myself that I was allowed to choose without asking for permission, that I was allowed to prioritize my own needs without feeling guilty. And that kind of change does not happen all at once. Happens in small moments repeated over time, until one day you realize you are no longer the same person you used to be. One afternoon, while I was picking up Oliver and Sophie from daycare, one of the teachers pulled me aside and said something that stayed with me. She said they seemed so happy lately, more relaxed, more open, and I smiled politely, but inside I felt something shift, because I knew why. It wasn't because their world had changed dramatically. It was because mine had, and children have a way of feeling that even when they don't understand it logically, they feel the difference between a parent who is constantly overwhelmed and one who is finally at peace. And that realization meant more to me than anything else, because it showed me that the decision I made was not just about me, it was about them too. It was about breaking a pattern that could have easily continued into another generation if I had not chosen to stop it, and that thought alone gave me strength on the days when I tried to creep back in, because doubt does come back sometimes quietly, unexpectedly, in moments when you are tired or vulnerable, and it whispers questions. What if you overreacted? What if you could have handled it differently? What if things could have been fixed without walking away? And those questions are difficult because they sound reasonable, they sound like logic, but they are rooted in fear: fear of being alone, fear of being judged, and fear of making the wrong decision. And learning to recognize that difference between fear and truth became one of the most important skills I developed through all of this. Because not every thought deserves your trust, and not every feeling deserves to guide your actions. Sometimes you have to step back and ask yourself, is this coming from who I used to be or who I am becoming? And that question alone has the power to change everything. A few weeks after my father's message, I finally replied, not with a long explanation, not with a list of conditions, just a simple sentence: I need time and space, and if you are serious about your apology, you will respect that. And for the first time in my life, I set a boundary without feeling the need to soften it or explain it away. And that boundary held. He did not call again, he did not push. He simply responded with, I understand, and maybe that was the beginning of something new. Not reconciliation, not yet, but respect. And sometimes that is where healing starts, not with grand gestures, but with small, consistent changes that prove someone is willing to do things differently. And I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my parents. Maybe one day we will sit down and talk openly about everything. Maybe there will be accountability. Maybe there will be understanding, or maybe there won't. And I have learned to be okay with both possibilities, because my life no longer depends on that outcome. My peace no longer relies on whether someone else chooses to change. And that is a level of freedom I never thought I would have. And if you are still listening to this story, I want you to know something important. You do not need permission to protect your peace. You do not need approval to step away from what is hurting you. And you do not need to justify your boundaries to people who have never respected them in the first place. Your life is yours, your energy is yours, your future is yours. And the moment you truly understand that, everything begins to shift. Not because the world changes, but because you do. There is one thing I have not told you yet, not because it was not important, but because I needed time to understand it myself. About 3 months after my father sent that message, something unexpected happened again. Not dramatic, not loud, but quiet in a way that felt almost heavier. I received a Frumison and Tannen letter. Not a text, not a call, but a handwritten letter. And the moment I saw the handwriting, I knew it was from my mother, and for a long time I just stared at it sitting there on the kitchen table, unsure whether I should open it or not, because some things once read cannot be unread, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that kind of weight again, but eventually I did. I opened it slowly and began to read, and what I found inside was not an HSFN apology. Not really. It was something more complicated. It was a claim. Reflection of a woman who had lived her entire life in a way she had never questioned until now. She wrote about how she had always believed that love meant sacrifice, but only in one direction. She wrote about how she had followed the same pattern she learned from her own parents without ever realizing the damage it caused, and for the first time, she admitted something I never thought I would hear. She said, "I did not see you. Not really. I saw what you could do for us. I saw what you made easier. I saw what you carried, so we did not have to. And I am ashamed that it took losing you to understand that I had to stop reading for a moment because those words landed deeper than any argument ever could. Because they were not defensive. They were not trying to justify. They were simply honest, and honesty, even when it comes too late, still matters." She did not ask me to come back. She did not ask for forgiveness. She simply wrote, I learn how to be different, even if it is too late for us, and I don't know why, but that sentence stayed with me longer than anything else, because it showed me something important. People do not always change when you need them to. Sometimes they change when they are forced to face the consequences of their actions, and by then the relationship may already be broken beyond repair, and that does not make your decision wrong. It just means the timing was never in your control. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the table. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with acceptance, because for the first time, I understood that closure does not always come from reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from understanding, sometimes it comes from seeing the truth clearly and deciding that it is enough. And that night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat by the window watching the city lights, and I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. What does a healthy family actually look like? And the city answer did not come immediately, but when it did, it was simple. It looks like respect. It looks like showing up. It looks like listening without needing something in return. And most importantly, it feels safe. Not perfect, not easy, but safe. And I realized that I spent most of my life trying to build something that never had those elements in the first place, and no amount of effort could change that. And if you are listening right now, I want you to think about your own life, your own relationships, and ask yourself, do they feel safe, or do they feel like something you constantly have to earn, because that difference matters more than anything else? A few weeks after that, I took Oliver and Sophie to the park. Just a normal afternoon, nothing special, but as I watched them run laughing, without worry, without fear, I felt something settle inside me completely for the first time since everything happened. I wasn't looking back. I wasn't wondering what could have been. I wasn't waiting for anything to change. I was simply there, present, and that moment, as small as it was, felt like the real ending to my story. Not the confrontation, not the truth being exposed, not the fallout, but that quiet realization that I had finally stepped into a life that belonged to me, fully and completely. And if there is one thing I hope you take from this story, it is this: you are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to walk away from what hurts you, even if it is family, and you are allowed to build something better, not out of anger but out of love for the life you deserve.